That's why I've learned I can't smoke with my shirt off. Because I've had that happen on my bare stomach, and I just sit there in my garage without my shirt on going, ah!
Burns your nipples straight off! Tales from the Ditch, starring Sean Allen Moss. Especially starring Seth Jacobowski. Co-starring Seth's Insecurities. And also, guest hosting Nathan Hartley when Seth goes to the bathroom. Hey Nathan, how you doing?
Doing well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nathan.
Good to be back on.
It's good to have you. Nathan's wearing a Bad Brains shirt.
Yeah.
Good for you, man.
I was surprised.
Keeping the dream alive.
Neither of us knew that was his thing.
It's true.
I remember I saw you posted, I don't know, maybe on Facebook or something, you were like, these are the top 10 bands or something like that. It was one of those things where it's like, somebody challenged me and now I got to do this. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I literally made a playlist out of your top 10's bands.
Nice.
And I have it on Spotify as Nathan's favorite band.
Nice.
And I listen to it all the time.
One of the better ways I've influenced people.
Yes.
It's not all in bad ways.
And so Nathan is in ministry. Him and I have good talks about that. I will say this. Before I was a Christian, he was one who evangelized to me. He's been a huge encouragement. He's donated at least 50 cents to the show. It's insane.
And many beers.
And he
Many
brings
excellent
good
beers.
beers. Which actually, that's the topic. Actually, I was thinking about this.
Oh, fantastic.
Tonight, we will start out talking about something that is near and dear to all our hearts, which is beer.
Go on, sir.
Beer. So.
Wait, coffee?
Yeah. No, because here's the thing. All right. Let me take off my, normal pastor hat and put on.
I was worried you were going to say pants.
And put on my butt masking hat. No.
That's masking?
So here's the thing. And I want to get into more questions, but there's something cool about beer. I think just alcohol in general. The Bible even talks about, wine makes man's heart merry. You have monks who are making it. Luther, even Martin Luther with his dopey haircut. So what is so, Nathan, in your mind, what's so great about beer? What's so great about, and not even just beer, mead, wine, all this. And I know we have listeners who drink, shocker. What's so great about it, man? What are the things you enjoy about, or even brewing? What does that look like? Cause you've been brewing. So lead us off with beer, Nathan of Hartley.
For me, I've been brewing for probably about 6 years or so. About 5 or 6 years. And for me, I enjoy the complexity of what you can do with it, how things change with age. I enjoy, as I've learned more about brewing and my palate's gotten a lot better, really appreciating the different techniques to manipulate it so many different ways. And so for me, I enjoy a good beer because I can sit down and have a good beer for a very extended period of time. For me, it's not something that I don't like drinking beer when I'm out working in the yard because I don't like most beers that are refreshing to drink while you're working in the yard. I'd rather...
You don't want to wait for the mountains to get blue before you can open it?
In the summer, when everyone releases all their session beers, I'm like, can I just drink my barrel-aged beer when it's 100 degrees? Can I still do that? Because that tastes better. But for me, it's the contemplative side. As I've said, since I brew beer, it's the whole process for me that I enjoy. There's a conversational aspect to it.
Yes.
That there's kind of that aspect where our culture, while we drink to excess so much, the taboo culture with alcohol that we have is also foreign because people get obliterated. And you go in other cultures where you can drink at a much earlier age, and it's a social taboo to show that you're drunk in public. And
in those cultures where you can drink early.
Yeah, I was talking with a friend of mine he's British. He was raised outside London and spent time in Australia when he was in university.
I thought you were going to say Folsom. Spent time in Folsom. I was like,
Used to be a rugby player, so
yeah.
a lot of time spent in pubs. He's like, oh yeah, you get 5 or 6 pints of beer, but it's a disrespectful thing if you lose control.
Really?
If you get obliterated, it's kind of a test of your mettle of how you can drink and hold yourself together. And that's something that, shocking, Americans don't exactly have a lot of self-control
What?
or value such things. So getting obliterated, there's not really a taboo there. And for me, it's like, no, I'll sit and drink one beer for somebody else's 3 or 4, and I'll enjoy every last drop of it far more than they'll enjoy their pint or two.
Yeah.
I think it's, so with me, yes, I'll answer your question, Nathan. Stop badgering me. Okay.
I know you used to play rugby in Europe, but sorry, I gave that away.
I think, one, as being someone who has a lot of anxiety or wrestles with depression, I obviously, as a pastor, I'm not going to go out there and get just blasted, where I'm just puking, I'm out of control. And thankfully, I have friends who hold me accountable. They really will be like, hey, you good? Like, even my brother-in-law will go, hey, you good? Like,
yeah, and you've always been good when you and I are having a beer to make sure I'm good before I leave. And
yeah, just, you want to do that. But I love the idea of the effort that goes into it, the different flavors, the complexity of it, and just that, I relax a little bit. To me, it reminds me of even nostalgia. Like, I can have a good conversation with people. If you invite 4 or 5 guys over, decent movie on Netflix and some good beer, and I stress that good beer, and some decent food, and you can go out and debate and smoke your pipe and talk about life, talk about books, talk about everything. I've even my boy Maverick, when I've had a guys' night and we're sitting around talking, he's hearing grown men talk about complex subjects, smoking pipes, drinking beer, showing their scars, talk about, oh yeah, this and that. I associate that with beer. Of even my favorite pub, I go in there, the bartenders knew I was a pastor first. And we have good discussions, and I get to try stuff from different countries. For me, there's a huge social aspect.
Yeah, and
I just enjoy it so much. Like, it's so...
Even now, we're drinking a Belgian quad aged brewed by monks that I've been sitting on for 6 years.
Yeah.
And I look at it all the time like, do I want to open that now? No. I'd rather open it with somebody else. Because then it's sharing. There's an aspect of community and sharing with good beer. It's a little bit different than like, here's this 6-pack of a Pilsner that I brought over. Hey, you want another one?
Yeah.
It's a little bit different than was like, here's this beer that a lot of effort went into, a lot of time. Let's sit and be contemplative while we talk and enjoy this.
Which, P.S., great beer. I think it's a good beer. Well, how do you say, is it
Chimay.
Chimay Blue.
Chimay Blue, great one. What about you, Sean? So, Sean, you were drinking before me because I had that little stint in Straight Edge where I was violently attacking people. But what about you? So with beer, what is the thing where you go, this is what I appreciate?
Well, the weird thing is, well, first of all, thank you, Nathan, for bringing the Chimay Blue.
Always happy.
Yes.
Always happy to share.
We are honored and appreciate it. And I feel like actually these Trappist beers have something special about them. Even if they're not good, there's something crazy thinking like this has been a craft that's been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years. You know what I mean? Yeah. People like old paintings, people like old sculptures, people like old books. And the same way, like, I think it's there's a way that you can appreciate beer by saying, wow, this is like something that's been brewed this way for a long time.
And I think there's I'm showing my nerd side here, but I think there's an art aspect to it too, where you get to, I enjoy sharing beer that I've brewed because I'm getting to share something that I was creative with other people for them to pick apart, to enjoy, for me to share, I tried to do this, these hops imparted this flavor, added them at this stage in the boil to make them taste like this, and things like that, where it's all the nuances that you can do with things, that for me, that's the appeal. And I don't like having a lot of beer in one sitting because you don't taste it and you can't appreciate it because your palate's jacked up.
After a while, yeah. Yeah, and I think, like, that's the best thing. Like, you aged this beer for 6 years. You aged it. Yep. We're going to say that. And that's in
like
itself,
a rooster or chicken on egg. He sat on top of it just very
in itself, that is kind of part of the art a little bit, because we all know you'll get a beer that's a year old, or you'll get a beer fresh and it's pretty good. You get a beer that's a year old and maybe it's good. You get a beer that's 5 years old and maybe it's good, or maybe it went bad. You never know. That's part of the experience too, which I always think is interesting. Some beers age better than others. Hoppy IPAs don't age well, so you want those as fresh as possible usually, but there's a couple barrel aged hoppy beers that age well. So it's really interesting. even past the creation of the beer, there's still this ability to change kind of how it is.
Mm-hmm. Like just last week, I bottled I brewed a dry Irish stout, so the same style as like a Guinness, which traditionally for dry Irish stouts, they actually naturally sour about 30% of the beer and blend it back in. So it kind of gives it a dry, tart flavor that's kind of characteristic. And I've built up 6 strains of Brett, which is Brettanomyces, which is a wild yeast in an oak barrel. So I naturally 100% fermented it with wild yeast.
Oh, wow.
So usually wild yeast it's notorious for spoiling wine because it imparts very distinct barnyardy, rustic-y flavors.
Yeah.
But in 100% fermentation, it gets kind of fruity. And so I brewed a dry Irish stout with 100% wild yeast. And I was like, hey, this tastes pretty good. Sat in a barrel for 6 months and decided to blend in like 3 pounds of sour cherries from the tree in my backyard into it.
Oh, nice.
Have you guys heard of, and this is alleged, some people dispute because Germans argue, the oldest brewery in the world, the way you say it is Weihenstephaner?
God, they're like 990 years old.
Dude, it says, so they allegedly started, and this kind of goes into some of the stuff you said, Sean, and some of the stuff. Where is it? Wikipedia is never wrong. 1040. So that would be 978 years of brewing beer. That's just, and I'm not gonna lie, dude. Like, I don't love all their stuff, but they have some stuff that's pretty good.
I think they've had time to dial it in.
They probably sucked in 200, though.
Yeah.
Luther's like, I liked Weihenstephaner before it was cool. I hated the Jews.
In our Reno culture, we have so many breweries starting up.
Yep.
And I really do feel like it takes a couple of years to understand your equipment and understand the process. And so and it's been interesting. I've seen a lot of breweries start out terrible and kind of maturing into like making a really good beer. And it's been neat to see that
What
process.
beer would the disciples drink? I think Paul, because he hated himself, would like IPAs. Because he was like, I'm the chief of all sinners. I need to drink bitter things. So Paul, I think, would like IPAs. What would Peter like? Because he's more sanguine and...
Oh, yeah.
Won't
Peter
shut
definitely liked the imperial stouts.
I feel like Peter would be like the guy that likes sours because at first he hates them and then he realizes, oh wait, I repent of my ways.
Yeah.
I turn from my denial.
John the Beloved would like something smooth and appreciative.
Yeah, John the Beloved likes like an English cream ale. I feel like Judas probably likes the Pilsners and lagers.
I could see Thomas liking IPAs because at first he doubted himself and decided, no, these actually are good.
He wasn't
I
sure.
actually enjoyed it.
I actually was right the first time.
I think Thomas liked high quality IPAs. All right, that's in the Bible. It's in Psalms.
He just had to put his finger in it first.
Have you ever thought
Prove to me this is real
that the
beer.
verse that says we are but vapor, maybe it's talking about taking liquids and you know, I don't know. I'm trying to reach here.
Oh, butt vapor.
There
Oh,
is
but vapor.
also, I mean, the experience of drinking beer in a communal fashion is, it's also, I feel like kind of, therapeutic sometimes. I feel like, and you know, this is maybe a razor's edge because you could say, oh my gosh, you know, if you get somebody drunk, you actually get to hear the truth from them. And I don't know if that's necessarily true, but when you drink beers, there is some type of experience where I feel like you break down walls of possible like discrimination or racism or something like that. And you're actually able to experience a person without your biases and without their biases of communication. And it is something special. And I've noticed that happen between me and you, Seth, even though like you didn't drink for a long time and you were actually against drinking.
Yes.
And you somehow still justified me drinking and we're okay with it, even though another person who would drink, you'd call them a sellout or something like that. Or you'd say they're, you know, a dirty drug dealer. Or
Fatty
poison.
McButterpants.
Yeah.
Yes.
So even then, I feel like there's things that you and I have had discussions about that we never actually discussed or were at liberty to discuss
Yeah.
without having a beer.
The walls had to come down because it does. It removes a little bit of that insecurity, a little bit of that defensiveness. And there's something to say for it being a bit of comfort. Proverbs 31:6. Give strong drink to the one who is perishing and wine to those in bare distress. I'd love to see Anthony Bradley talked about this. I'd love to see a sermon on that. That's literally, let me see.
That's my memory verse.
And I think there's a proper theology of alcohol throughout Scripture.
Yep.
And to divorce the prominence of alcohol throughout Scripture, especially in relation to communion with wine, and even just the rich imagery of wine all throughout Scripture, you take so much of the power away from it. You say, oh, well, that wasn't fermented. And it's like, I don't think you understand how chemistry works.
Yeah.
Things with sugar, as you let them sit, ferment. That's what they do.
Imagine giving someone perishing Welch's going, here's some grape juice. They're like, you are a cheap person and I hate you. I hope I perish. Like,
and I think it's...
I want to perish.
Yeah.
In some aspects, like, I believe our generation is blazing a little bit of a new trail culturally compared to the last few generations in our country, because there is a craft aspect to things that was not always the case, where you are able to enjoy things. You have access to things from around the world, different traditions. You're able to emulate traditions of different alcohol from all over the world that you couldn't always. So there's an aspect of learning to appreciate things without it destroying your life. And it's also something that I treat seriously after working for the last 12 plus years with teenagers. As much as I've brewed beer for years and have enjoyed it for years, and that's not something that I ever hid from them, I would never talk about it. I wouldn't post about brewing things, or even I'd be notorious for a bit. If I was at a wedding, the photographer came around, putting my beer under the table so pictures don't pop up on social media.
Huh.
And I had that very strong conviction that was something I chose to do, not out of a spirit of legalism, but understanding that I was ministering to kids that, for some of them, they might associate nothing but brokenness with alcohol.
Absolutely.
That's true.
Yeah.
And a certain level of weight and responsibility I felt with that, to say, I don't want to start a conversation that I don't have the opportunity to finish and carry somewhere helpful, because the way somebody can associate alcohol with sin and brokenness and pain.
Yeah.
And there's that very real aspect where I get the opportunity. I grew up in a family that I can remember seeing my dad have a beer half a dozen times in my life. Rarely
Same
drank.
here. My dad was not
And so I can come into conversation about alcohol, and I haven't personally experienced pain and brokenness that it can lead to in destroying of a family. That's certainly not the case for everyone. I had great modeling to me. My dad came from a family of alcoholism and saw the way that it destroyed his family.
Yeah.
And so there's that aspect where I have to come to a place of humility too, to realize I kind of have a blank slate to come into this, and to be careful not to let it have an unhealthy role in my life, to repeat a family pattern that I didn't see firsthand.
I think that's smart. I came from a family.
Too.
I came from a family who was broken because of alcohol. And so I thought for most of my life that I wasn't going to be able to drink, and I would think this as a teenager. I was like, I was drinking, we were drinking, the fanciest beers as teenagers, like Keystone Light, or maybe even Natural Ice.
Ah, Nat Ice.
Or that Steel Reserve. It's so good when it hits your bells. St. Ides. But, so I would say, hey, this is a bad thing that I'm doing right now. And I'm doing this bad thing because I'm rebelling. But if theoretically I was in a state where I wasn't rebelling, I would not drink, because drinking is bad. And the only thing that alcohol brings is bad stuff, which is the honest, in my heart, it was honestly how I felt. And then I feel like through becoming a Christian and understanding my freedoms, that was eventually to some point redeemed. And now I can drink, which is nice. But, and even like Psalm 104 talks about like, it's like, God, you're so grand because of like the heavens and the earth and the mountains and the dinosaurs and the space and the rain, and how you gave wine to make the heart of man glad, or make the heart of man merry, or something like that. And it's like, appreciating that God is the God of everything. God is also the God of alcohol. And that's awesome. And so I have to be careful, obviously, since I come from that family of brokenness, not to associate it with that, even as I'm partaking in it. But it's super important, I think, to me, to understand that, like, God is sovereign over even that. But I totally appreciate your humility in that, because we're called, more than experiencing and enjoying our freedoms, we're called to lay down our freedoms for our brothers. And
amen.
That's, I think, what you've exemplified by kind of hiding the beer under the table or whatever. And I think that's amazing.
And I didn't have my first full beer until my 21st birthday, because for me, I grew up in the straight edge scene also.
Yep.
And for me, it just wasn't a temptation.
Yeah.
And some of it was, I had felt a heavy responsibility that I kind of put on myself as being kind of an older brother figure in most of my friend circles.
You had to act 40 because they were acting 12. Like, I'm sorry, but I was older than you, and I was like, Nathan, what should I do? You're old, maybe not go to prison. I'm like, okay.
Whatever.
So, yeah, whatever.
So for me, I remember I was straight edge up until I was 19. So for about 6 years is when I was a part of the scene and actually told people I was straight edge. But for me, I tried to have it never be a part of my identity. And I remember the day that I decided not to be straight edge was when I actually got hired at a church. And I remember talking with the senior pastor, and he's like, I didn't know when I offered you this job that you were straight edge. And at that time, there was a lot of beef and it was kind of a hot button topic in our area.
What?
And he's like, is that something that with integrity, you can say that you leave behind you? And I'm like, absolutely. This isn't a part of my identity. It's part of a social circle I run in. And so for me, it was like, okay, yeah, not straight edge anymore. No problem. And I was still underage for 2 more years, about a year and a half. And I remember when I was getting ready to turn 21, I talked to the same pastor, who's a mentor figure in my life for most of my life. And he's like, oh, so I'm guessing that now that you're 21, you're not going to drink, right? Because you used to be straight edge. You must have strong feelings about it. And I told him, I was like, no, I plan on having beer because I
Joke's
don't,
on you.
like, it's not going to wreck my life.
Yeah.
And for many people, it's not drinking or it's drunk and destroying your life. It's trading one extreme for another. And that was the irony I saw being a part of that scene, is like, there's still destructive extremes. You're just trading one for the other, but you're running from the same things and you're looking for something you're filling an aspect of your identity that I believe cannot be filled apart from Christ. So you're looking to horizontal aspects of your life for something to fill that gap. And I say, no, because the vertical aspect of my life, I don't need to appeal to anything horizontally, socially. Yeah. So I was able to give up something like straight edge, say, no, like I can let go of this. It's a horizontal aspect of my life that doesn't form my identity. And at the same time, when I turned 21, it's like, no, of course I'm going to drink in moderation, because I also don't want to appeal to a different horizontal aspect to destroy my life.
Right.
And my brother had been brewing beer for years, and I'm like, no, I'm excited to be able to enjoy God's blessing through alcohol in moderation, but I'm still not going to be an idiot, and I don't want to abuse those freedoms, especially with the weight of being at the time, 20-year-old still working with teenagers, saying, no, like there's a weight here that I got to figure out, because there's delicacy that I want to walk carefully in as I shepherd people.
I want echo what he's saying. Yeah, echo it.
Can I just say too?
I'm echoing
too by saying, how many straight edge kids do we all know that stopped being straight edge or sold out or whatever and went immediately from no alcohol, no drugs, no tobacco,
to an extreme
heroin,
dude,
like instantly.
Yeah,
they went from I don't participate in any of this because I have this ideological belief that it's wrong, to being the absolute opposite instantly. And I think that just kind of proves your point, Nathan, about they're still operating in extremes, even though they consider themselves outside of those vices.
I did, even with the witness, because I had gotten out and I was a Christian, and I'd come to a point, I said, this isn't my identity. But part of me knew, hey, these guys value and respect this. What if I smoke and drink and I lose a little bit of credibility with them when I'm like evangelizing or talking to them or sharing, the love of God? So a part of me actually said, I actually would like to drink or have, a cigar, but I'm choosing not to because I still was like, no, if that's one more thing that's going to make it even harder to evangelize or one more barrier where they go, oh, we lost a little respect for you. I go, then it's a small thing to give up. So I actually, it was like 3 or 4 years went after I decided, no, I'm still not going to drink or smoke. And then when some of them started drinking or smoking and wasn't an issue, then I allowed myself to, but I wanted to, but I just thought my witness was more important and I knew they valued it. And those are my guys.
And I remember talking with you before you started drinking and you're like, I know I can now. I'm not a part of that. But I know with me, I'm an extreme person. If I have one drink, I'll be beating my wife. And I'm like, okay, that's a little extreme.
That was a concern. Yeah, that was a concern.
Kind of went from a 0 to a 10 there pretty quick.
Because I was worried that I would go back to how I was when I used to drink with Sean. I was worried, I was like, I'll go bad too. That was another thing. I was like, this can go wrong. But
And I think there's an aspect to it where you know yourself. Like, even still, I try to be mindful in social situations how much I drink because the extrovert in me comes out very quickly because I enjoy the social environment. So you can watch me open up a lot because I just enjoy being around so many people. And my wife is very good to kind of poke me in the ribs and say, hey, you look like you've had more than you've had. And I know it's because you're excited to see these people, but you look like you might have been drinking too much.
Right.
And so I've had that trigger of like, okay, I know I can look like I've had too much and I've crossed the line, but that's more the extrovert side of me coming out. And so I'll scale it back and be mindful. As she knows as soon as she mentions that I'm going to listen because there's an appearance there. And it's kind of this humbling aspect that presses on my own ego to go, I know that I'm okay and I'm choosing to submit to my social surroundings with a good attitude and make a choice for what I want is the greater good. Even if I can argue in my head and reason it away and say, no, I haven't crossed any line. Right. I'm still in control and I know that. But if there's that perception that other people may not know that, well, that's a line I don't want to be crossed. So it's time to stop. And that's completely okay.
So you mean you don't say slag off and break a beer bottle and say, don't try to change me.
Yeah,
and walk off into
the... Don't tell me how to live my life, devil woman.
But I'm curious, you have recently migrated from a very large church to a very small church. Or not very small church.
More moderate? Is it moderate church, would you say?
You moved from a mega church to a local church. How about that?
Hashtag Sean's racist.
And we all know that you've done this with excellent planning, revelation from God, and seeking wisdom from several other people. You haven't made this move just for the sake of your own comfort.
He didn't decide this lightly. It was,
I think is that something I can absolutely talk about because there's the aspect where there's not scandal there. So there's the aspect where we so scandalize everything that I've had so many people ask me.
You didn't show your butt to the congregation or anything.
Well, even that, it's like people have this natural reaction of like, tell me what's the real reason.
Exactly,
and I'm like, I told you the real reason. And my situation is a little unique because I was raised at the church that I was on staff at. I was there from the time I was about 5 years old. And I've been on staff at that church since I was 19, came on staff full time. And was there on staff full time for 9.5 years.
Wow.
And most of that time was spent in youth ministry. And the average time in our country that a youth pastor is at the same church is between 18 and 24 months.
Are you joking?
I believe that.
Is that a real number?
That's a real number.
That. I was one of those statistics.
Yeah, you were a youth pastor.
That's
right.
I was 8 months.
Huzzah.
So I think I sufficiently blew that statistic out of the water.
Yeah, very good.
And through that process, I had numerous conversations with the leaders above me and around me that I was submitting to their authority to say, hey, what's the future look like? Because I'm in a little bit unique situation that I have almost 10 years in full-time ministry experience, but I'm only 29.
Right.
And in church world, in church land, that's young in the majority of churches. And there's, for me, I felt a strong conviction to humbly acknowledge that I am young and that is something I chose to do, to say, no, I'm young. I don't want to be arrogant and say I've been doing this 10 years. I chose to err on the side of saying, no, I'm 29. I have a lot to learn. And there's the aspect as well where I've been on staff at the same church since I was 19 and I need to learn and to grow. and to get experience in a different area and in different areas. And an undergirding thing for me was working with teenagers for as long as I have. I've gotten to see the long-term fruit of the opportunity that's there, that I think most people, when they church hop every 2 years, they rob themselves of a severe blessing of being a mentor figure in people's lives for such an extended period of time.
Yeah.
And working specifically, I don't like high school people. High school people aren't cool. They're terrible, mean people. Like, freshman girls are some of the meanest people on the face of the earth.
Amen. I've been saying that for 20 years.
The only people that are meaner are, like, middle-aged women that drive, like, Lexus SUVs. It's like the two mean
waiting
people.
in line at the Gimbals.
At the Gimbals. I don't even know what Gimbals is. But anyways, I love middle school ministry. And because it's a time in their life where somebody's really welcoming in an outside voice in their life other than their parents for the first time ever. Teachers, coaches, small group leaders at church, counselors at camp, youth pastors, whoever. They're really asking for input in their life for the first time from somebody outside their family.
Yeah.
And there's responsibility that comes with that. And I've gotten to see where, as I've been in ministry in the same town for so long and ministry in the same church setting for so long, I get calls all the time from students that I haven't seen in 8 years. And they're like, hey, you may not remember me. I was in your cabin at camp 8-9 years ago. Can you meet up and talk sometime? And they're kids that are in their early 20s, mid-20s now. And being a part of that. And that's, for me, that was an undergirding the weight and responsibility that comes with that. That the goal for me is for those former students and people that I've had the honor and privilege of being a part of their life for a long time. And for some of them walking through very dark parts of their life with alongside them and be invited to do that, to say, okay, the goal is for them to fall more in love with Jesus and more in love with his church, not less. And it doesn't take a lot, especially for a college age guy, to make them bitter and jaded and distrusting. Yeah. And there's kind of the natural position of young people, and I'm not going to say millennials or Gen Y because I hate the generation conversations.
Thank you.
That's far more American than biblical. But there's the aspect of saying it's a part of youth. And there's a characteristic of youth now where people are distrusting of organizations. I want people to fall more in love with Jesus and be more engaged, not less. And everything I've done and said through this transition, that's been my filter. Whether that's them continuing to stay engaged, more engaged at the church that I have transitioned out of, or moving somewhere else. I want them to fall more in love with Jesus and not check out, not be bitter, because at the end, they're going to pay the price and they're going to lose.
This is apples to oranges, but as a former school bus driver, I've kind of had that same experience, driving kids to school and then seeing them 10 years later in adult life trying to deal. A lot of times I've been like, oh, hey, what's up? Person who I drove and I barely remember, but you remember me for some reason. How's it going? And they go, oh, it's good, man. And you were fundamental in this leap in my life where I decided this or that. And it was usually, I decided not to be a school bus driver. But there's a lot of people who said, oh, wow, like it was really cool how you treated us more like adults than like children. It was really cool how you talk to us like people instead of like inferior people. The funny thing is, actually, when I became a bus driver, I saw the bus driver who drove me in middle school. And she goes, oh, well, guess what? You're going to get your just desserts now. It's finally going to work out. So the kids
Joke's
hate
on
you.
you.
Exactly. And it never happened. And she goes, I bet those kids are really bad for you. I go, actually, they're really well behaved and they respect me quite a bit. And she goes, no, what a cruel world I live in. I never got to see this stupid kid because I would terrorize her when I was a student. Yeah. It's pretty terrible.
And I've talked with many, many people who have floated from church to church every 18 months. You typically have people that do one of two things. They're either at the same church for a long time, or they hop around all the time and always looking at it as a stepping stone. And that's kind of the stereotype with guys that work in youth ministry is it's either you're a lifer or this is a stepping stone and you want to be a lead pastor and this is just the first step. And I looked at that going, I don't think those are the only two perspectives and avenues.
Right.
And I kind of had to come to a place of even just this last winter, saying, I've been doing this for a long time. It's harder for me every year to welcome in new 5th graders that are moving into middle school because I'm still mentoring kids that are in their 20s. And they got my best. I can't give my best to new kids anymore.
Totally.
And that's not fair for me to still act like I can, but to say, no, there's an aspect of youth ministry that, yes, being a pastor, there is a relational intensity to that. I'd say that there's some, and I'd argue this case, that there's some unique aspects that it's abnormally intense during the teenage years than it is for the rest of adulthood, just because the independence factor, they're becoming independent, but they're not. So they're a little bit more intensely messy, so they need more
and physiologically, they have all that hormone.
Exactly, like it's just a little bit more intense.
Yeah.
And their worlds are small, so anything and everything is a bigger deal than it is for the rest of their life.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever people that work with teenagers complain about them being dramatic, I'm like, maybe you should find something else to do because it comes with the territory. You can't resent them because of it. Like, it's normal. Get over it.
Man, I wish you were my youth pastor.
You say that now. But so for me, I had to admit, like, it's time for me to do something different because I can't continue to give the best to this next group of people coming in who are other people's kids. And there's kind of a privilege that comes with being invited to be a part of people's lives and
Absolutely.
And by parents to be invited to be a part of their kids' lives. Mm-hmm. And to say, hey, it's time to let somebody else do this. It was kind of a humbling thing for me, but I'm so grateful.
I think the fact that, all right, because some people I think go, well, there's this pastor and then youth pastor. No, anytime you have that title of a shepherd, of a pastor, elder, anything like that, overseer, it is such a responsibility because they're not just welcoming you into, and an honor. I like that you said that. They aren't just welcoming you into birthday parties or the weddings. You got the funerals. You got the suicides.
Yeah.
You got the, hey, Pastor Nathan, I was sexually assaulted last weekend. And it's just insane, what you deal with. Like, and Nathan, you know a little bit about that. Well, no, you know quite a bit. I had one person who I got called to go there while they decided to stop the life support, and she was a friend of mine.
Yeah.
And a year or so later, her sister dies too.
Yeah, I was a friend of theirs too.
It's crazy because I've been part of weddings where, you know, I did the ceremony, I officiated, and then a few months later, I did a funeral. So, yeah, I think it just is crazy the amount that you see and the amount they let you view into their lives, because we kind of drive by these homes and go, well, here's the kind of snapshot we see, or Sunday, the snapshot we see. And then they come in and say, what if I don't believe in God? Yeah. What if I don't love the way my parents want? What if my mom and dad hit each other? And there's just so much I don't know, there's just so many depths to it.
And I tell people that ministry can really be a graveyard for the empathetic, because if you don't have a healthy understanding of who you are and who you're not, and if you're looking for validation through the role that you play in people's lives, you can be so enmeshed in who you're ministering to that can be so much more about you than them. And especially when you're working with other people's kids, like, that's not something to take lightly.
Absolutely not.
And to differentiate, they don't necessarily differentiate, especially as kids get older in their high school years. They don't see the line between mentor and peer as being separate often. So they naturally see you as a peer.
Yeah.
So they expect you to be their secret keeper. They expect you to be buddy-buddy with them. And to have a healthy understanding of where that line is, to say, no, this is still somebody else's kid. No. And they've invited me to play a part in their life. And I want to support them as much as they invite me to give input and to give biblical counsel, which is, it's biblical advice. It's advice based on scripture and truth. But whether or not they listen to it, you can't control that. And why I say it's a graveyard for the empathetic is because people screw up and they blow up their lives.
Yeah.
And being in youth ministry for so long, it's hard because I can think of countless names of kids. Names and faces come to mind of kids I have no idea where they are. And they're kids that I visited in juvie, kids I visited in the hospital when they tried to kill themselves.
Yep.
Kids that talked with me at campfires at camp when they're like, my life is blowing up, my dad's leaving my mom, what do I do? And to show up for a minute and to really trust to say, God, I may not know what this kid is in a year or 6 years, but I trust that you're going to do something with this deposit you're making in their life now. And the results of this have no bearing on my worth. And I can't be overeager and show up and just try to convince them and all that, because that might have more to do with me than them. And that's hard to, because you really have to have a clear differentiation of who you are.
Yeah, I think that is so important, because when dealing with people's kids specifically as a youth pastor, you are seeking validation that you're doing a good job from the parents. And, well, I mean, you shouldn't be, but I think that's your default. And so at some point when I was a youth pastor, I'm doing hand quotes because even though I had the title, I don't really feel like I was doing a good job.
8 months.
I did 8 months. But
people can have babies in that time.
I felt like I was literally attempting to appease parents more, and I'm not blaming anybody. This was my fault more than anybody else's. I was attempting to appease parents more than I was ever attempting to present these souls to God.
Absolutely.
And that's a really dangerous place to be in.
Yeah.
And like you said, if you're sure of yourself and sure of your standing with Christ and you're sure of your theology, it's a lot easier to be able to present your argument to parents who say, I don't like how you're doing this. Teach my kids not to smoke, you know, or whatever it is.
Yeah. And I think there's a natural desperation that comes with being a parent to a kid in that stage in life. And I'll be the first to admit I've never been a parent of a teenager. I can give advice that I've learned from afar, but I don't have the perspective of a parent. And too many guys in youth ministry try to act like they know what it's like. It's like, no, you don't. Like, you're not a parent. My job as a youth pastor was to be an expert on teenagers and teenage culture, to try to present the gospel to them.
Yeah.
That's my job, to translate.
Yeah.
And to say, I remember we got back from summer camp one year, and I had a high school kid with us who, I firmly believe in like getting kids serving early. So I got my start in serving youth ministry when I was still in high school, serving with middle schoolers, and I never stopped. And it kept me grounded as I was in my early 20s, realizing like, hey, I don't have the option to be a normal 21-year-old because I have to look my small group of boys in the eyes tomorrow.
Yeah.
And be a man of integrity.
Right.
But, so we had a high school kid with us, and he came home after a week of camp, and a week full of middle school camp, you have to say so many things that you never thought you would ever have to tell another human being, like, stop smearing poop on the walls. Those words left my mouth. And as they were leaving my mouth, I'm like, I can't believe I'm having to tell somebody this. So many things. So many things. We had, just this summer, my last summer at summer camp, which was weird, we had one kid that overheard a conversation on the second night of camp when a kid asked 5 minutes before lights out if he could shower. And we're like, no, it's like 5 minutes before bed. No, shower tomorrow. A kid was like, wait, there are showers at this camp? And I was like, yes. He's like, can I take one now? I was like, please do. I'm glad you found out on night 2, not night 5. So there's an aspect where it's like, yeah, it's a lot of work. And this kid came home and told his mom, who I've known for years, man, these parents don't know what it's like to put up with their kids for a whole week. And she was like, excuse me? Parents don't know what it's like? And I'm responsible to be fun and to speak into kids' lives. I don't have to be the one waking a kid up and telling them every day to hurry up and get ready for school or pick up their crap.
Wash your foreskin.
Stop playing with your dinghy.
Yeah, quit playing with your dinghy. I don't have to yell that in the bathroom every 10 minutes. And there's the aspect where it's like, you know what? If you're invited in people's lives, you're still not a parent. You're not, you don't bear that responsibility. Just show up and be faithful to speak truth and encouragement where you can, to just be a part of some kid's life.
I'll give you my kids. Dude, multi-ethnic on the black market, 10 grand, baby.
Question for both of you. There's, now this is different. You have changed careers recently from, a large church. It's considered a mega church technically, right?
Big boned. It's not fat.
Just to be specific, average attendance 2,500 to a church of average attendance of 500.
Okay. So a lot of people say they have theological reasons, not pastors, not career changes, but church changes. A lot of people say they have theological or biblical reasons to not want to be part of a church that's 2,500. They say the New Testament church model was to have house churches, and generally that would only be up to 50, even though they're ignoring the church in Jerusalem. They say that people can't be fed by groups that large psychologically. They'll say that there's no discipleship in a church that's that big because nobody can keep each other accountable. Do you guys think that's true? Or is that simply an excuse to leave a uncomfortable position?
Nathan, I think, is going to have a different perspective than me. And only because, and I'll admit it, we have what would be considered, I don't know, I think my church would be considered a mega church because it's over 1,000. But there's Nathan and I, and this is one of the things, ow, I just pinched my finger. Ow, can we stop the podcast? I pinched my finger. No, Nathan and I met over the years discussing how to navigate this and, working, dealing with church and being leaders. But mine, I had different issues, and not because his church is less or mine's better or mine is less and his was better. More because we just, how would I say this? We set up kind of our worship different. We had different structure. And that's not dig against his old church. It's just we had a different structure. So I want to hear Nathan's view because I have my view on that, but it's from a different, because I'm more Acts 29, and sometimes we kind of get different issues, different criticisms where, that's the word. Your church had different church model.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I have my thought. What's your thoughts on Nathan? Because we're both from, it's not a tiny church. Mine was over 1,000. Yours was over 2. And in America, I thought statistically that is a mega church when you start getting into that range.
I think what comes to mind is I just finished reading John Perkins' book, One Blood. You and I were talking about it on social
I
media.
love it. Good book.
Haven't read it.
It's a good book.
It's
Dude, it's blood red. It's cool.
Yeah, and John Perkins was a part of the civil rights movement. He's in his late 80s, and he's written about a dozen books on racial issues.
Oh, nice.
And this book is his parting words, basically, on race to the church.
Yeah.
Huh.
And he references an African proverb in there that I think is very powerful. That says, when I saw you from afar, you looked like a beast. When you got closer, I realized you were human. When you got closer, you looked like my enemy. When you got closer, I realized you were my brother.
Wow.
And there's an aspect where I think that's very powerful, because when you surround yourself, especially if you grew up in a church and had a bad experience, and then as an adult you find community in a church, or you got saved in a church, whatever that situation might be, there is an ego that comes with my church is the one that's doing it right.
Yep.
And that is sinful. It's utterly sinful.
Yeah.
And it is a derogatory view of God's church. I promise you, God's church is more diverse than is comfortable for you.
Yep.
There are different expressions of God's church, large and small, that have unique personalities. There's not a major league church and a minor league church. There's not a church that's doing it right and a church that's doing it wrong necessarily. There are different perspectives. I have seen amazing blessings where I was leading our baptism ministries and baptizing between 150 and 200 people a year, and hearing people's stories and realizing you are getting saved. But with the back of my mind knowing this probably isn't the church you're going to worship at for the rest of your life, or even for the next 10 years. You might find a better home at another church across town where you can be more engaged, where you can find community and be discipled in a way that's specific to what your life is like. And that's okay. Large church, small church, it's about being healthy. And God uses different churches in different ways, in many different ways. And the church that I was at, it was a larger church and it grew a lot, even in just recent years. But the majority of churches in our area have some roots there. Some of the largest churches in our area were birthed out of that church.
That's true.
And there's a humility there to realize, like,
That's true.
That's okay. Like, bigger isn't always better, but bigger is also not a sign of unhealth. And we have to be careful because we're not, like, we were raised with scandal. Like, our generation is used to seeing leaders fall and organizations fail and companies be corrupt and exploitive, like all these things. Well, yeah, we can bring something to the church, and we naturally assume that church that's bigger across town that we've heard things about is a certain way. And I've had to have probably 3 conversations with people in recent in the last month, as I've enjoyed kind of being between jobs, to just kind of take a breath and relax and worship at friends' churches all over town that I've never gone to visit. Mm-hmm. And I've had people, I've heard that this church is that way. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but what I've seen is completely to the contrary of what you've said and the things I've heard. Yeah. And I think you're wrong. Like, I think that's diminishing them as a brother. And I think that's kind of arrogant. Mm-hmm. And I think we kind of need to call that sin for what it is. If God is using a church, have the humility to go in and interact with the leaders and the people of that church before you criticize them when you're sitting having a beer at a bar with a friend who goes to the same church as you. Because I think your perspective is probably pretty shallow, and you're the one who's missing out.
Buns.
Or refusing to go to a bar because you think that church.
Hashtag.
Because you've heard that the pastors at that church go there. and ultimately, it's about having humility. And it's about seeing your brothers for what they are. And I've met pastors at churches that I've heard all kinds of scandal from that struggle. And then I get to interact with them and I realize there's so much more here that I understand.
Yeah.
And you've been faithful here. And I want to learn from you. I don't want to throw stones at you from across town because ultimately that's sin. And more often than not, it's coming as a church leader. It's easy to overlook the things in your own church that you're convincing yourself aren't as big a deal as they are, when no, they're probably in pretty bad shape. And when you look at somebody else's church and okay, that's wrong. It's like, well, but what about that in your church? That's wrong too.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, be a part of God's church moving forward. Don't pick it apart. The church is terrible about eating our own.
Do you think ducks ever have turf wars with geese?
I've seen it happen. The geese eat duck babies.
No, you're joking. That's really sad. Is that true?
Yeah, the geese are like, we'll show you, and they eat their babies.
All right, so we were talking about ducks. So I would say the Siberian socialist duck is my favorite. Mainly... No, that's just Seth, just new boot goofing. All right, so big.
What if we related that to the Mighty Ducks? Are you Team Banks?
That's true because
Team Banksy?
They fought the Siberian geese.
That's true. I kind of agree with Nathan. Here's the thing. I feel like I've been at churches where when I was at a small church, sometimes, not all the time, they really promoted we care more about this. And they'd give their reasons of we care more about intimacy, or we care more about, brotherhood. And big churches I went to, we care more about, we want to send people out and we want to plant churches, and do this or that. And the conclusion I've kind of come to is I don't see either as evil. It's more like what Nathan is saying. There are guys I've met who lead small churches who are awesome, humble servants, and guys I've met who are kind of abrasive and they're jerks. There are guys I've met from big churches who really just know how to make people still feel intimate and close, even though it's a huge church. And there's other guys that go, man, you're a jerk, just abrasive. And there's no connection. And it's very just alienating and big. I'd say I have no problem with someone honestly seeking God and him bringing them to a certain church or a certain area. I have no issue with that. My only issue, I'm thinking now, is more with the American thing of leaving for stupid reasons of, I left a small church because they weren't doing anything. Well, did you participate? Did you ask them if you could start that ministry? Did you say you'd like to be on the worship team? No, but nothing was happening. Yeah. Okay. Or they say, I'm leaving the big church because no one cared. I go, okay, did you join a community group? No. Did you serve? No. Well, did you, when greeting time came up, did you actually say hi and get to... Yeah. No, I'm not going to do that.
Were you there 10 minutes early or did you get there 10 minutes late and complain that you don't know anybody?
Right.
So it's like, yes, I'm not dismissing that there are problems in small churches and big churches, but I've come to see it's problems in the church. Yeah. And I'm not saying there's not abuse. Sometimes you really have a guy where you go, dude, this guy, no, he was straight up abusive or heretical. But sometimes I've heard stuff where they go, yeah, I just, and I'm not even kidding. They go, they had the worship, but those drums were a little loud. And I go, wait. So you're telling me you agreed with the sermon. People loved you and greeted you. There was opportunities to serve. You loved the mission, but the drums was turned up a little too loud and you bailed. Yes. In how long? Oh, after 2 Sundays. That's the issue. So
Yeah.
I
think
know.
there's an aspect to
Go
it.
ahead.
The counsel I give people usually is, do you feel like you can be involved there? Are there issues that you need to bring up that are hindering you from being involved? Have you brought them up? Because as a pastor, there's nothing worse than finding out that somebody left because of an issue that you had no idea about.
Yeah.
And they leave and you're like, well, I
Yes.
can't do anything about it now.
Yeah, totally.
And so bring it up. Bring it up with humility to say, hey, and sometimes that doesn't even look like style of church. That doesn't look like theology. That can look like personal issues. That can look like I dated a person that's on the worship team and it's hard for me when they're up there because there's beef and baggage there.
That's never
It's like,
happened,
okay, embrace
Nathan.
that with your own humility to say that's your issue. Talk with a leader about it. Figure out if you can be involved. If you don't feel like you can be, find somewhere you can be. But
There
the
you
burden's on you to get involved. And sometimes I've had people say, like, well, I don't like this church because they don't have ministry to blank.
Yeah.
Well, this church, I wish this church would do ministry to veterans. I wish this church would do ministry to prisons. Okay,
Israel.
do it. If
Yeah,
that's
there's
something,
no men's breakfast here.
no, it's
What's
like,
going
well,
on?
then start one. Start a men's small group and serve breakfast. Like, if you feel a calling to prison ministry, don't wait for your pastor to agree with you. Do it.
Yeah.
You're a part of the church. If that's something that God's called you to, be a part of starting it.
I had a guy
That's good.
complain once about, men's prayer. So I started one and he didn't show up or any of his friends. And it was frustrating because, to be honest, I went, all the guys who showed up were none who were asking, and then eventually it was 2 guys. And they were going, man, we really need this. I go, well, I started. Oh, well, I'm busy on those days. I go, well, what days are you not busy? Well, none of those days really work for me.
Yeah.
Well, you asked me.
Yeah.
And it's like,
And I've heard people say, oh, well, I don't feel like anybody knows my name there. I went for months and nobody knew my name. I'm like, how many people how many names do you know?
Yeah.
And they're like, and they get quiet and it's like,
Joey Jojo Shabba.
if you sit up,
Shabba-doo.
if you show up 5 minutes late and you sit in the back with your arms crossed and the look on your face like, don't talk to me, don't you dare talk to me. There's a personal ownership there of saying, how much are you being approachable, or are you
Yeah.
expecting other people to cross a line that you're not even crossing?
Totally.
agree.
That's
And there's
true.
an aspect of that where that's kind of self-centered, and that's going to carry with you wherever you go.
To the next church. It's funny. I've seen people go, yeah, that church wasn't for me. And I'm going, isn't that the 5th church you've left? Yeah.
There's a common denominator here.
But it was them. It's like, if a dude has a divorce, all right, there's a chance something went wrong and it maybe was, but when you're on your 5th divorce, I start to go, hey, why are you getting married? What are you doing here? Like, what type of, to quote Jabba, hey, what type of person are you? Like, what's going on?
And I
like,
think,
legitimately.
I think there's the other side to it is some people have stayed at a church too long in the
Yeah.
sense where they have some disagreements and they've tried to influence change in a direction that is different than the majority. And that's a hard position to be in. And I've been through seasons where I've been in environments where that's been the case. And that can be hard because it can be toxic. It can be very delicate. And that's soil that the enemy can do a whole lot of weeds in if you're not careful. Sometimes there's the other side to go, you've given this a try for 5 years. You've fought with leadership. They have a different vision than you do. Understand that maybe it's not your job to convince them to do things the way you think it should be done. Maybe it is okay for you to find another church, and that doesn't mean you're a church hopper.
Yeah.
Because there's kind of that side to it, it's like, well, I don't want to be one of them. And I'm like, well, I think you're in the territory where find somewhere that you fit from a philosophy of ministry. Like, there's that side to it too, and that's okay. And some of it's knowing, like, I know I'm a loyalist to my core. I can stay in friendships too long when they're not healthy. I can be loyal in situations that I should have made changes sooner. And I know that about me. That has to reflect how I behave. Otherwise, I'm going to continue to emulate that pattern, and it's not going to be good.
Right.
And if you know you're flaky, well, chances are you need some accountability to not be a flake.
Yeah.
It depends on, it's that humility to know how you're wired and where your natural bent is. If your bent is to ghost in and ghost out and not get to know anybody, challenge yourself. Challenge yourself with accountability. Make a decision to say, I've been going to this church for 2 years. I've gone once a month. I know no one. No one knows me. I've kept them at arm's length. There's sin in my life that I'm not happy with. I want people to know me. So I need to start showing up a few minutes early and actually make a point to learn somebody's name every week. That will have a snowball effect quickly.
Yeah, definitely.
But if you just go once a month and show up right as service is starting and leave as soon as it's over and you don't get to know anybody, there's ownership there that might be on you.
Yeah, definitely. You just described Seth, actually.
First 15 years of our friendship.
He's all, sometimes you're friends with someone and they cross their arms and they poop on your mailbox.
But really, like, I hear what you're saying. Like, you need to have emotional intelligence and even understand yourself before you can make those decisions without having some bias. And I agree with that wholeheartedly.
And I have said for years, we need to not have white people in church anymore. I've been clear about this.
So tired of the
and
whites.
Thank you for people affirming this. All right, guys, go ahead, call into our hotline, vote 1-800 Sean's a liar. Fibby McFibbenstein. I actually, I think this took a good turn because I was just going to keep talking about beer for the next 15 minutes.
I was happy with the beer conversation.
I got to say this.
It's all right. I think this is technically the fourth podcast I've been on. Technically.
How many have you been on?
Wow,
this is the third time I've been here, but the first time we recorded 2.
We did 2, yeah, you're right.
Dude. So
this is a fourpeat.
That's
So
right.
Nathan, and this is our
Nathan's
40th.
the first fourth.
This is our 40th podcast.
40th. Weird.
Yes.
Hey, 40 minus 31 plus 2, 9/11.
Whoa. It's a conspiracy.
Am I right? Am I right, guys? All right, Seth, your topic.
I did have a question. So, we've talked about how you and I are the greatest pastors ever lived. I mean, come on, people. I mean, really.
Come on.
Like, download my sermons. What are you excited for most in the next season? So you're going to a new church. You're praying like, God, how will you work through me? You're praying, Lord, how will I take all the advice Seth has given me to be the fantastic preacher and honor Seth? Because Seth says, no. What are you most excited about in this next season? Like, is it the opportunity to see what's different? Is it the resources? Is it, what could be done in this new community? Is it the people you're going to work with? What are you most excited about this next season?
I think there's a very real part of it where I am so freaking excited for the people I'm going to be working with. Some of them I've been friends with for 10 years. I'm excited to work alongside them in ministry. I really, truly am. My wife and I are excited to be in ministry with them. And I'm excited to learn and grow in new areas. As I interviewed at some churches that are smaller than the one I was coming from, they're like, well, this might be the minor leagues compared to what you're used to. I'm like, no, this isn't a minor league and major league thing. I'm excited for what God is doing in your church. I'm excited to get to know the people in your church. I'm excited to learn about the history of what God has done. I'm excited to see how I might be able to lead towards the future. And I'm excited for what God's going to do. And that's it. I am excited to see what God's going to do. I'm going to be learning and growing and being stretched and being mentored in new ways and new conversations, seeing blind spots I didn't know I had, seeing areas that I'm going to be stretched in, seeing areas of wounding I didn't know that I was wounded in. I will be better off because of it, because I'm going to be learning and growing and seeing what God is doing in families and in people with their passions and their giftings, and seeing what God's going to be doing in an area that's new. There's kind of that fresh eyes and coming in and saying, I've been in the same environment for most of my life. And just realizing hey, this is going to be a lot of fun. And there's going to be some things about it that are hard, but I'm going to get to learn and grow in new areas. And I know God's faithfulness is going to show up there. I want my view of God and his church to be bigger than it has been. And to see what God's doing at church across a city that I love, that I've grown up in. Because I've always felt a calling to Reno. There's a lot of unique there's a lot of unique aspects about Reno. Idiosyncrasies about Reno. But I understand the culture of Reno pretty well. It's home. And I'm excited to see what God's doing in another church in Reno. And that's an exciting thing for me.
Are you finally going to debate John MacArthur?
No comment.
I'll comment for him.
Is there really ever a debate with John MacArthur?
Or just
right.
a
I'm pretty
When
sure that's...
Sproul loses the debate with MacArthur, you're kind of screwed.
And there's just the reality. I don't think MacArthur really likes debate. He doesn't like talking to people. I don't know if he likes people.
Good thing he's not a shepherd.
Yeah. Hi-oh.
I want to, before
Especially
we...
them charismatics.
them
They're
charis-
barely people, according to
them
MacArthur.
90%
They're more reptiles than people.
heretics. Oh, like the liberals. So... Alex Jones.
Can I seriously say, though?
Gosh, you just...
I'm sorry.
Quit stepping on my
Put
moment.
your question together
No,
while I'm saying
no,
this.
go ahead, Sean.
When
I'll just
MacArthur
throw it away.
and Sproul debated about infant baptism, MacArthur, least charismatic person that exists,
Go on.
destroyed Sproul, one of the most charismatic pastors that I've heard talk about, or at least heard express his beliefs. He absolutely 100% destroyed him. I think even Paedo Baptists would admit that MacArthur won that debate. And it's so strange because you had MacArthur go for 45 minutes. He goes, this is why, this is why, this is why, this is why, passionately. And Sproul goes, yeah. He goes, he's probably right, but I believe this. But I love John MacArthur. I've never heard John MacArthur be more personable than when he was debating for his opinion.
Nathan
super
fell
interesting.
asleep at his church while he was preaching.
True
This
story.
happened. Tell the story, Nathan, please.
Oh, let's
this
hear
is
it.
his tale
His
from the ditch.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know if this is the best tale from the ditch, but
Oh, his
It'll
church.
do.
It
It'll
was
do.
like being in the ditch. Go
they
ahead.
definitely have better ones, but this was an experience. We decided to go to this was back when I was like middle school. This is
That
actually
long ago?
yeah, I was in like 8th grade. This is actually the week I got saved. On a mission trip I was too young to be on. My youth pastor told me to go on it because he wanted me to go. We went to Los Angeles for a mission trip when I was in 8th grade, hanging out in South Central LA for a week.
Wow.
And I got saved that week, even though I grew up in the church. And on the end of the trip, we're like, hey, we'll go to John MacArthur's church on the way home. So there's like 8.
It's kind of like going to Dairy Queen after your camping trip.
It's like it's worse. It's bad. So we decided to go to MacArthur's church after a week of getting up at like 5:30 in the morning and getting back at the house inside at like 10:30 at night. So we go to MacArthur's church. All of us are wearing like, you could tell. I had one kid ask me one time like, "Hey, are people going to know we're on a mission trip?" I'm like, "Trust me, I think they'll know." A bunch of white kids pull up in a 15-passenger van and file out, and half of them haven't showered in a couple days.
Yes.
People will know. All that's missing is the name tag. So we show up in MacArthur's church, and all of us are wearing our like button-up shirt and like pants that we were told to bring to go to church that are obviously stuffed in a backpack for a week, so they're all wrinkly. We're all haggard. We show up and we're like, "Hey, we're going to sit in the second row." No one prepared me for how boring this church was going to be. We're talking orchestra, kettle drums, full choir robes.
Kettle corn?
And
Oh,
we're-
kettle
not
drums.
kettle
Never
corn, I
mind.
wish.
Oh,
So we sat in the second pew. There's like
pew,
8
pew.
pew. So we sat in like the second pew right in front of MacArthur. A whole pew, like 18 of us. Every single one of us fell asleep.
oh my God.
Take that, Johnny Mac.
The entire like second row of his church that sat like 2,000 plus people probably. Like it's a massive auditorium.
Oh my gosh.
And we are dead center right in front of him, and our whole pew fell asleep. Like, a couple of guys, like, head back, mouth open, like, not dozing off and catching yourself, like, asleep. And the entire time he's standing up there just looking at the pew while he's preaching, like, what is with these guys? It was so bad. It was just the timing, the cadence of everything was just, it was a snoozer, and it was just a bad time. We all fell asleep. And that was back before MacArthur was like the lightning rod that he became,
Yeah.
where he kind of like, people started to say, okay, maybe he's a little more extreme in some areas. That was a time when it was like, that was what, 15 years ago, 16 years ago.
Wow.
So it was a time when his programs on the radio, that was pre-podcast, all these things, like he
Right.
influenced a pretty large generation of church
Yep.
leaders because he was heavily accessible and he was pretty accurate theologically. So people were heavily influenced by him. So a lot of people were like, "Oh, that's so cool. You got to go to MacArthur's church." How was it? I'm like, We all fell asleep.
Strange
And
tired.
people were like, what do you mean you fell asleep? I'm like, you don't understand. We tried really hard, but it was really boring.
John MacArthur has pulled a knife on me no less than 3 times. And I don't appreciate it. It was not civil. It was not Christ-like. He showed me the blade. He threatened me. And no, I've never, here's the thing. I'll say this because sometimes I can be so, persnickety, to use cuss words. That,
Watch your language,
Well,
sir.
John,
Don't use that kind of French around here.
I appreciate, and other people have said this, I appreciate that John MacArthur is such a fierce advocate for the authority of the Bible. Like, I appreciate his vigor in that, his passion, that he really does have a loyalty to it. Where I don't agree is that I don't feel there's a lot of charity given to his opponents, and that there's not a lot of listening and just gentleness in that. Like, yes, I love that someone's like, hey, we have to take the Bible seriously. Amen. And he's that guy. And you know what? Sometimes I can go too far to the other side where I take things, I'm too loose about things. But I just, in the language, and the Bible is clear with Jesus about our rhetoric and with Paul about how we should speak. I just sometimes have looked at him and gone, you're saying something that on paper I might partially agree with, but you're saying it at the top of your lungs in a way that just doesn't represent it. It's the same thing as to me, when you have someone who might be more conservative stating something I agree with, but in a very unloving way and in a way I would not present it. So I don't hate the guy. I appreciate him as a brother. Like, I really do. But it's just, there's stuff where I sometimes go, hey, J-Mac, like, that's what we're buddies. We call each other.
J-Money.
J-Money.
Chill on the snore fest.
Is there any way you could have, discussed that better or debated better or said that in a gentle way? Because I do believe as Christians we're supposed to be charitable and gracious and loving. And that's my issue with him. It wasn't necessarily the content. It was a lot of ways he displayed it and conveyed it.
And I think I think for any of us, my prayer for me is that the fruit of my next season of ministry, that the fruit of who I am and how I conduct myself is a way that's honoring to God.
Amen,
that is drawing people closer to God, and that is inviting to people. And the fruit of how we conduct ourselves, I think, matters a lot. And I can be more and more certain about the things I believe, but if I look more and more like a jerk and people don't like talking to me, I'm not okay with those results. Yeah, and that's a personality thing. Like, by default, I value relationships very, very highly, and I'm an arguer at heart, but I will always, when I can tell it's starting to cost me a relationship, I will back down. Sometimes to a fault. More often than not to a fault. I will choose the route of maintaining a relationship past the point that I should, and I will lay aside my arguments for the sake of that relationship. And like I said, to a fault. Like, I have to be mindful that, no, this is a hill that's worth dying on, and it's okay to die on it. And not everyone's wired that way. Some people, it's the opposite. That if they acknowledge that there might be a hole in what they're thinking, that there is a semblance of security with that, like, being right and having a system to their faith matters greatly.
Yeah.
But that's just not how I'm wired. And I think sometimes, like, we can overplay, we can read into somebody's intent. Some people are wired different. I'm somebody that's wired, like, I value relationships over winning an argument. And there's always kind of that inner tension with me. And I have to be mindful of the negative ways that flushes out, but I think there's some positive ways too. And I think that's same for the other side of the aisle. When you're arguing for a system that you believe in, a theological point you believe, you might be right in your mind, but it might cost you relationships with people. And you might start to see, there's a trap there, that you might start to see people as an enemy when they're not an enemy. You might start to see them as a villain when they're not a villain. You might see them as a fool, where maybe they're not a fool.
Yep.
And there's also a context personally that I'm kind of backtracking a bit, but it's like taking teenage kids who haven't slept in a week to John MacArthur's church is probably not a good idea.
Yeah, it was a pretty bad idea.
Simply because they're going to fall asleep. And it's not saying anything against John MacArthur's ministry. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Because of the way physiological effects work, you didn't have a choice. You know what I mean?
I was a 14-year-old. I had no rights. I had
To
no
some
choice.
degree,
fault.
yeah, you
your
fell
fault,
asleep
Nathan.
because that's what 14-year-olds do who haven't slept in a week.
Especially at 10 o'clock in the morning,
Yeah.
when my biological clock says I should be asleep.
With somebody who's not super engaging, like you needed like more of a Tony Robbins or something like that. And so there's
A
some
Rory
type of
Calhoun,
intelligence
if you will.
involved in selecting those things because I'm not sure about this for you, but I'm sure if I was in that situation, I would have said, John MacArthur, he's an idiot, and I never want to listen to him again because I had this experience at his church. And how many years would that last before I realized that was just my emotional experience at the time,
Yeah.
instead of actually seeing that in like my context through reality?
Yeah.
And so I think there's a little bit of like your youth pastor maybe had a little bit of a responsibility that he failed upon.
And it was funny because the next year, the church we decided to go to on the way home was Erwin McManus's church. We went to Mosaic
Nice.
in the Mayan in downtown LA.
Yeah.
So it was funny to see that contrast. 'cause
Yeah.
This was still, 14 years ago. But that's a church that met in a nightclub and met inside the Mayan in downtown LA. The church is comprised of some of the most artistic people in the country. And
Says cuss words often.
and this was pre-cuss words. But
Oh, really?
it was really interesting because there was a vibrancy to it. There was a different expression of worship. Truth was valued very highly.
Yeah.
And the context was very different. And in large part, like, I'm a testament to mentors in my life exposing me to situations that were very different than my bubble. Like, I'm a white churched homeschool kid from Reno, Nevada, who's been in church most of my life.
Right.
That's like prime candidate for a Christian bubble. But there's a lot of situations where people push me outside it, even spending a week in downtown LA. That makes a lot of suburban families unnerving. That makes them uncomfortable to send their kids to South LA for a week.
Right.
I'm a product of a lot of people putting me in situations that were different than my experience would take me to and keep me in.
You're welcome, Nathan.
And part of that was Macarthurs. Part of that was the following year with McManus.
That's a good point.
And it fleshes out different now where I look at McManus and say, okay, there's some areas where I think you ran off the rails. There's some areas where I look at people like MacArthur and say, there's areas you ran off the rail. And I can look at that with humility to understand context, to what you were doing ministry in and the season that you're in. Because MacArthur's lost a lot of weight with people. You talk to average younger leader now, MacArthur's not even on their radar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You talk to make people now, McManus isn't really on their radar. It's moved on. There's some aspects for that might be a good thing. There's some aspects of that where somebody might have went off the rails and gone too far in some areas. But there's also some aspects where we can't have the same conversations with people that had more of a voice 15 years ago than they have right now. And because leaders look different. McManus turned into guys like Judah Smith and other leaders that are more prominent. Those conversations, I think, depending on who you're talking to, if you're talking to somebody that's 40 and was heavily influenced by MacArthur and is still a MacArthurite to the core, okay, there might be some conversations there about where maybe he's gone too far and what that influences look like in their discipleship. Maybe, maybe not. But you really have to weigh that out because it's easy to talk about it when you're in a pub having a beer with somebody who remembers something MacArthur said how long ago when he fought Driscoll in the parking lot at his conference. Like, that was... Even bringing up Driscoll now alone, you're talking 5 years post-implosion of Mars Hill. Driscoll's almost an irrelevant name.
How do I get on people's radar, Nathan? I'm interested.
Yeah, what if you're on a podcast that's...
Hi all.
That really hasn't paid out as much as you think. And I preach. I mean, I don't work at it. But, I get up there every now and then, yell at people for 40 minutes. That's about it. So...
Yeah,
Sean showed up. Sean was in the audience. Yeah.
There, yeah.
Sean came to my sermon. That's something. Right, guys?
Yeah,
Do you
something.
hear the crickets? You know how discouraging that is? The crickets, Sean?
I
Deal
know
with
we have
that.
literal crickets. I need to get an exterminator.
I don't like the sound of nature in my backyard. I want to know creation is dead.
I feel like I have to keep talking so the crickets don't overshadow my voice and make me feel irrelevant.
I
think the noise removal takes care of them.
Maybe
Seth,
it's a sign from God.
Yes, Sean.
I think it's time for the question.
Well, hasn't he already? All right. Well,
We have different questions now. That wasn't me.
Well, first, that was you.
That was not me.
First, let's remind people our 50th episode is coming up.
Oh,
And we're going to try to the best of our ability, depending on how much they love the gospel, inviting everyone who's been on this podcast
or
to come.
a fan.
Dude, that's so
Anybody.
many.
That's at least 9 people.
But I don't like some of our fans. Some of them, stop. I
don't think some of your fans might like you.
So why are they? Oh,
Who do they think they are?
Numanium. All right. So first off, that.
What a day to be alive.
Secondly, Nathan. All right, Nathan. So I gotta ask you because I'm gonna get into it. Salty or sweet?
Sweet.
So with sweet,
I've got a sweet tooth.
and I'm not gonna David.
We've already asked him cake or pie.
Yeah, Dave Beck has already brought his lawyers in, so we're already in this ridiculous court case. It's just crazy how popular we are. When it comes to sweets, let me ask you this: do you prefer more sweet or sour?
I'm not a fan of sour.
You're not a
which
fan
is
of
weird
sour.
because I like sour beer, but I don't like sour food. I don't like sour
Weird.
candy. I like sweet stuff.
Do you
So
think?
you don't like the Mexicans?
Dang it!
I mean,
Sean!
sorry, Mexican candy?
Racist.
You went there.
Mexican
That went south
candy. What do
quickly.
you think? So Mexican candy. What are your thoughts, Nathan? You like it?
I'm not really a fan. It's funny because I have a sweet tooth, but I try not to indulge often because
Secrets.
I eat a bag of candy and I eat the whole bag of candy. So I try not to indulge my sweet tooth often. So I just don't keep sweets around me.
Do you think sweet should be mixed with salty? I don't. I don't.
See,
care
I'm more
what you
of a
think.
I'm more of
I
a
think
fan
it's
of
stupid.
savory than sweet or
Dave,
salty.
this is the
Okay,
Dave
okay.
Beck trip.
Like,
We need to
Dave
say
says there
savory.
should.
So
No, we need to say sweet or savory.
there we go. See, I would go.
And Dave Beck says it can be both.
I
Why are
would
we
go
doing
with
that?
savory because
Savory.
think about it this way: if I have in front of me a bowl of salted roasted cashews, a bag of beef jerky,
Yes.
or a bowl of Skittles,
Hello
I'm gonna
there.
go with the jerky every time, and that's
Okay.
more savory.
Fair enough.
Than
What
salty.
does savory mean?
Savory kind of means salty. I think when you hear salty, you mean savory.
Because I hear salty and I
I
think
mean
like
kidney
that's what you
stones.
I think
That's
like-
what I mean.
I think salty and I think
Why did Dave
I
Beck
think a bag
call
of,
us
like, mixed
closed-minded?
nuts.
Okay, here's
Dave
the
Beck calls
question.
us closed-minded because he said you can have both, remember?
It's true.
Is
Dave
it
Beck-
closed-minded?
It's closed-minded, but what Dave Beck's not understanding
Closed
is that
behind.
what Dave Beck isn't admitting is that pie is objectively better than cake. Very.
I don't give a toot.
I don't give two darns.
Was it Coke in a Pepsi bottle? I don't go.
Coke bottle, Pepsi glass.
like I think
I don't give
if
a
I have the
damn.
option of like a steak and dessert or a steak and a glass of whiskey to finish off the meal, it's gonna be a glass of whiskey. Like I don't feel this
Oh,
need
okay.
for like, oh, well, let me see the dessert menu. I'm like, that money I could spend on dessert, I could get a glass of whiskey.
That's a good point. We need to refine our questions, Seth.
No.
I'm also the fourpeat, so not everybody has the fourpeat question.
Who's your least favorite
We're
people
editing
group?
so much of this
Let's
out.
do that.
Oh, yeah.
Who's your least favorite
This is an
people
edit.
group? Do you hate
Ethnic.
Do you hate
Who's
the
your least favorite ethnicity?
Do you hate the poor, the rich, the whites?
What
Who
kind
do
of
you
racist
hate?
are you?
What type of bigot are you, really?
Let me ask you this: who do you think you are?
Which denomination is going to hell and how quickly? Email us at talesfromtheditch@gmail.com unless you're someone who disagrees with me because I'm shattered emotionally.
In 10 episodes, this is the 40th episode. On the 50th episode, we're going to have a big party.
Yas, queen.
So when is that? That's like in October.
Well, and I plan to cancel because of maternity leave.
Prior
So-
obligations.
Because
Seth
Seth's
is due to
pregnant.
have the baby.
Yeah. Sus Qdoba baby is due for
Yeah,
October.
I don't know. I would say it's October, but I'd like to schedule it a time where I don't have to be here.
You could be a true Reformed person and have it on Reformation Day.
Oh, my glob.
October.
You're my
That's
glob.
a good idea.
That's
a great idea.
Or you can be one of us liberal heathens and say that it's on Halloween. Depends on what your personal preference reads.
I make
it's
a
the
haunted
same
house.
Day.
I'd put a lot of effort into my haunted house, which may or may not be for Reformation Day or Halloween. You decide.
You could smoke some bratwurst because they're German.
If we
I could supply
really,
German beer.
let me get snobby. If we really want to talk about the original Reformation, you go to Ethiopian Church. I like the Ethiopian Church before it was referenced.
You know who's sweet is Zwingli? I like the way he
says his name.
You would Zwingli. Dun, dun,
Zwingli
dun,
sounds like some magical creature from a Disney movie.
Zwingli is.
It's like some magical floating creature in a Disney movie.
I summon Zwingli!
Zwingli. I have Pikachu. You have Zwingli.
That kind of sounds like a tropical disease. Did you
That's
get your
true.
Zwingli
I got the swing.
immunization?
Oh,
I got the swing.
I got the Zwingli. It hurts when I pee.
It hurts. Oh, the swing. It's swinging. Zwingli.
The Zwingli! Wow!
All right, so this is a podcast that for some reason you guys listen to, so zip it up.
Zip it out!
See?
Fair
Dave,
enough.
you got it.
You got it. First time.